Hello, today we're going to be looking at the paper 3 essay in your booklets. It's on number 1E. It's quite a difficult question. Cutting public expenditure rather than raising taxes as a means of reducing a fiscal deficit. There's just so many concepts all in there that you're going to have to really focus the answer to your question here. And my real piece of advice before we start is, if the other question is doable, then do that, because this is far too big and difficult to control as an essay. But I think it's worth going through it because I'm going to show you some techniques for making an essay more manageable if it's looking slightly difficult. First thing you should always do is to look at the data extracts. Data extracts tell us that there's lots of national debt. The fiscal deficit it has been negative recently, but it's going positive. Labour productivity is very disappointing. That's key. I think labour productivity can be used in this question because we can look at the supply side effects of reducing government spending or increasing taxation and what that will do. So that context is absolutely key because it makes the policies that you choose to talk about more important. So it's really important context. We get a little bit more context here in the productivity puzzle as well. Essentially, it's really bad. It's not improving. Investments in physical and tangible capital is low. Education and training needs to improve as well. And so you can bring this into your evaluations. Not a huge amount of context here. So you just need to do the best with what you have. Interestingly, the mark scheme for this says that you must include 4 things in this essay. You must include micro, macro, so I'll highlight the things in the question, micro and macro, but also expenditure and taxes. So you're going to have to include an awful lot of things in there to make this essay work. Because there's so many things, you're going to have to make it much more specific. So right at the beginning of the essay, I'm going to make this much more applied. So I'm going to use corporation tax as my tax. I'm not going to talk about any other taxes. And I will also talk about transfer payments as my spending. And I'll say why in a minute, why I'm going to do that. But a really important technique is, if you have a big essay, choose the points that you're going to talk about at the beginning and limit yourself only to those. There are a huge number of other types of policies that you could talk about, but you don't have time. Right, your first point, we're going to be talking about reduced profits for companies. Now, again, there aren't any companies mentioned in the text. So what I'd like you to do is to think about what company you'd like to talk about. I've chosen one. Choose one. And then, with reference to the UK economy, I'm looking for, well, what happens if there are corporation tax rises? How does that affect your company? Okay, come back now. Let's see what my answer is. It's not necessarily what yours is. I've chosen Barclays Financial Services. Really specific and applied because the UK is good at, it's one of its comparative advantages. That seems like a good firm to pick. Now, increasing corporation tax, you're going to start with your initial equilibrium of MC equals MR. You have a quantity, and this is all very standard, isn't it? Your quantity, your price, and your costs of financial services, and they were making a supernormal profit. Now, the problem here is that if you increase corporation tax, I've got a bit of a problem. You probably could get away with just saying the increase in corporation tax effectively increases costs for the company and raises ATC and MC. Technically speaking, though, it doesn't actually do that. So I've approached this in a bit of a different way. I've said, first of all, that by raising corporation tax rates, you're going to improve your fiscal deficit. So I'm referring back to the question. Another thing that you have to remember to do, you can get lost very easily in this, and say, right, we're improving our fiscal deficit there. However, if you have lower profits. Now remember, corporation tax is a tax on company profits as a percentage of those profits. So if you raise corporation tax, post-tax profits will fall, and therefore your reinvestment into the firm will fall. And here I'm going to give, if you're going to talk about investment, I would always try to refer to something specific, a piece of capital that this specific firm would be investing in. So here I talk about IT systems that Barclays might be investing in. And that's going to fall. And if that falls, their future average costs rise because they're less efficient. We're going to see a new profit maximizing equilibrium and a new level of supernormal profit, which will be lower. So my conclusion is that higher corporation taxes will result in lower supernormal profits, and they will then result in, it will improve the fiscal deficit, but it has a negative impact on the firm. Right, pause it here. What can you do to think of evaluations to that point? Okay, let's come back. Let's look at the eval. So my eval here is in the long run. The fall in corporation tax revenue might occur in the long run because of the dynamic efficiency problems and again, productivity. The fiscal deficit may improve, but in the future, if we have lower dynamic efficiency, we're going to see lower profits, and we're going to see, therefore, lower tax revenue in the future. So taxing the supply side effects to this and taxing your very productive areas of your economy may be negative in the long run. I might also refer, because I've chosen banking, I can now say, well, the PD of banking services might be inelastic. There aren't any close substitutes. It might be a high quality good. It might be differentiated. And therefore, any increase in costs for the firm could therefore be passed on to the consumer, and therefore it may not have a significant impact on the firm. And that's something further that you can discuss. Interestingly, in the text, you could also quote this: the factors reduced investment, both physical and intangible capital. That's interesting. You might quote that and say that this isn't a real issue for growth in the UK economy. Yeah, that's slightly going macro, so just be a little bit careful there. Right, macro point, productivity and economic growth. I'm going to use transfer payments. Can you start off there and see how far you can get using transfer payments as your point? Pause and come back in a minute. Right, coming back. Transfer payments. Why have I chosen transfer payments? Well, my first point, I talked about corporation tax. I was attacking the first part of the question, the taxes. Now I'm going to attack the second part here, public expenditure. So I'm going to find a spending point. And the reason I've chosen taxes, the transfer payments, is that it gives me a different answer. So cutting transfer payments, it doesn't cut government spending. Remember that transfer payments are not technically government spending, but it does lower the incomes of the unemployed. And by doing that, it lowers consumption, shifts AD to AD1 to AD2, lowering economic growth from YF to Y1. You're getting an output gap there. And you might have some further points here, though. So yes, you've got lower economic growth, but in the long run, you're going to have another effect. And that could be that productivity could improve. Incentives to work might rise, and your labor force might increase. People who used to be out of work might now be incentivized because they can't live on benefits anymore. And so the quantity of labor rises, LRAS shifts right, and you might get some growth as a result. Now, the result of both of these, we've got to remember to link back to the question again, is that tax revenue is going to rise because of you've cut transfer payments, you've cut spending, but also your growth will result in greater tax revenue as well from more people working and paying income tax. Refer back to the type of tax, cutting the national debt. You've got an awful lot of argument there to get back to the question. So you can see just how tricky this question actually is. We've done this before in terms of eval. Type of spending cuts. Try now and pause and see if you can evaluate what we've done there. think about other types of spending cuts that we could be doing and what the problems might be there with reference to growth and the fiscal deficit. Okay, pause and come back. Right. So it depends on the type of spending cuts. I've said, well, is it current? Is it capital expenditure? Is it education and training? Well, I've picked education and training because I found something in the text, I think, somewhere. Well, I found that labour productivity per head was very, very weak in the UK. Quotes it. It hasn't improved since 2008. Very much on a straight line there. And we also see down here innovation and training, failings in the labour market, immobility of labour. Okay, so that is an issue. Therefore, we can say that as a result, we could link back to productivity and say productivity could be one of the reasons for fall in productivity if we cut capital expenditure, education and training, and therefore future tax revenue. We could link back to tax again and growth. That could also be negative. So you've got an awful lot there to talk about. I had to really quite work hard to link that to the text, but we've got plenty of application in the first point as well from our own knowledge. Right, judgment. See if you can think of some things to talk about in the judgment. I'm thinking about context. Why is context important in this question? Short run, long run. Why is that important as well? Okay, coming back. So ultimately, the type of tax and spending cuts, it all depends on that, doesn't it? What you have chosen, the supply side effects of those, and that's where I was talking about the short run and the long run. So the short run effects are likely to be positive, at least on the fiscal deficit. It may have negative short run effects on growth. The long run effects are likely to be positive or negative depending on the type of taxation or the type of government spending that you're talking about. And all of these things, the magnitude and the overall outcome really needs to be linked to the context of the UK low productivity growth and low investment. Given that they are already low, any policy decisions should take that into account and should be very sensitive to the fact that we don't want to make any further impacts on that low growth, and any of these policies perhaps should be prioritizing productivity growth over the fiscal deficit as a short run and even long run position to improve long run growth. So I think you can really come down on a judgment and say, you know what, productivity here is the most important thing, and we should not prioritize the short run fiscal deficit for productivity losses in the long run. Hope that made sense. Really quite challenging essay, and as again I reiterate, I probably would not have chosen that essay had I had the choice. That does, though, emphasize the importance of being able to do both essays and having the knowledge to do both. Otherwise, you might be caught out on a very difficult essay.